18 seconds. From the first indicator of threat to the moment of decisive, irrevocable action, the entire decision-making window for the driver was 18 seconds. In that brief span of time, a universe of possibilities was compressed into a single, binary choice: follow procedure and perish, or defy protocol and survive. At stake was not merely the vehicle or its crew of 3, but a consolidated cash-in-transit payload valued at $5.2 million, destined for the central reserve of a consortium of banking institutions. The adversary was not a common crew of opportunistic criminals. They were a meticulously trained, heavily armed, and professionally disciplined kill squad operating on behalf of a major trafficking organization. This is a dissection of those 18 seconds, and of the single decision that rendered a perfectly planned ambush tactically irrelevant. In this business, we have a saying: the vehicle is your weapon, your shield, and your coffin. The choice of which it becomes is made not by the engineers who build it, but by the operator who commands it. To understand the driver's choice, one must first understand the context of the operation and the technical specifications of his tool. The mission was a sweep run, a routine but high-risk procedure in cash-in-transit logistics. It involved collecting the weekend holdings from multiple smaller branches and consolidating them at a single fortified processing center. The inherent vulnerability of a sweep run lies in its semi-predictable pattern. While timings and specific routes are varied daily, the origin and destination points are fixed, creating a finite number of viable pathways that can be analyzed and exploited by a patient and sophisticated adversary. This predictability, a necessary evil of the logistical chain, forms the foundational weakness upon which most successful cash-in-transit ambushes are built. The security protocols are designed to mitigate this weakness through technology, crew training, and tactical variants, but they can never eliminate it entirely. The vehicle itself was a purpose-built armored transport, a 14-ton behemoth based on a heavy-duty commercial truck chassis. It was certified at a B6 level of ballistic protection, meaning its opaque armor was engineered to defeat multiple impacts from 7.62 millimeter rifle rounds, the standard caliber for military assault rifles worldwide. The hull was a monocoque design, a welded steel box that provided overlapping plates at all seams and doors to eliminate ballistic gaps. The engine compartment and fuel tank were similarly armored. However, the most critical components for operator survival and situational awareness were the windows. The ballistic glass was a laminate of polycarbonate and leaded glass, 42 millimeters thick, designed to absorb and delaminate upon impact, catching the projectile within its layers without allowing penetration. This lamination process is a delicate science. Too hard and the glass shatters, too soft, and it allows the round to pass through. It is designed to stop the bullet, but not without consequence. A significant limitation of such material is a phenomenon known as spalling. Even on a non-penetrating hit, the kinetic energy transferred through the glass can cause the innermost layer to flake off, sending high-velocity shards of glass and polycarbonate into the cabin. These fragments become secondary projectiles, capable of causing serious, even fatal injury. The crew was required to wear ballistic vests and eye protection at all times to mitigate this specific, well-understood threat. Defensive systems were robust. The truck was equipped with military-grade run-flat tires, capable of maintaining their structural integrity for over 50 miles at reduced speed after being punctured. It featured an integrated fire suppression system for the engine and cabin, external tear gas dispensers, and a sealed positive pressure air filtration system to protect against chemical agents. Communications were handled through a redundant system of encrypted digital radio and a satellite phone backup. The crew consisted of 3 professionals. In the rear cargo bay, a single guard was responsible for the asset, isolated from the front cabin by an armored bulkhead. In the passenger seat, a communications officer and observer managed navigation, monitored radio traffic, and operated the vehicle's external surveillance cameras. And in the driver's seat was the protagonist of this event, a man with 17 years of experience in the sector, a former instructor in high-threat environment motorcade operations. His file indicated a deep and almost instinctual understanding of vehicle dynamics under duress and a psychological profile noted for its exceptionally low panic response. He was, by every metric the corporation used, the ideal operator for this role. The inciting incident for this entire event, however, was not a failure of technology or personnel. It was a systemic, high-level intelligence failure. The adversary had not placed a mole inside the corporation, nor had they hacked its servers. Their method was more patient, more analytical. For a period of no less than 6 months, they had conducted passive surveillance on the company's operations, logging routes, timings, vehicle types, and response protocols. They built a predictive model of the sweep run's logic, identifying the 4 most probable routes for this specific consolidation. They understood the standard operating procedure for an obstacle in the road. They knew the average response time for local law enforcement to a panic signal from this sector of the city. Their plan was not a brute force assault. It was a surgical dissection of the security company's own procedural doctrine. They had turned the corporation's predictability into the foundation of their kill zone. Within 90 seconds, that stretch of asphalt would transform into a kill zone, a term of art for a location where an adversary can bring overwhelming, interlocking fields of fire to bear on a target. The location selected for the ambush was tactically perfect. It was a 400-meter stretch of elevated highway overpass with concrete retaining walls on both sides. This terrain effectively canalized the target vehicle, removing any possibility of an evasive turn. There were no exits or off-ramps along this span. Once the armored truck entered the overpass, it was committed. The time was 6:47 in the morning, a period of low civilian traffic, ensuring a clear field of fire and minimizing collateral interference. The attackers had placed their primary blockade vehicle, a stolen sedan, broadside across the 2 lanes of travel approximately 300 meters onto the overpass. A second vehicle, a heavy sport utility vehicle, was positioned behind the target's expected stopping point, ready to close the rear of the ambush box. This classic bracketing maneuver is designed to immobilize the target, transforming it from a mobile, defensible platform into a static, vulnerable metal coffin. The profile of the attacking force was atypical for domestic criminal enterprises. Post-incident forensics and intelligence analysis suggested the team was composed of at least 8 individuals with prior military or special operations training, likely foreign nationals contracted by the cartel for this specific high-value operation. Their equipment, tactics, and fire discipline were not those of common criminals. They were armed with military-grade 7.62 millimeter rifles, and crucially, a single .50 caliber anti-materiel rifle. This last weapon was their ace. While the B6 rated armor of the truck could withstand repeated 7.62 millimeter impacts, it was not designed to defeat the immense kinetic energy of a .50 caliber round. Such a weapon is not intended to penetrate the armor in a single shot, but to systematically degrade it, to shatter engine blocks, to destroy axles, and most importantly, to psychologically dominate the crew inside. The sound and fury of a .50 caliber impact on an armored vehicle is a profound event, designed to induce panic and force procedural errors. The attacker's plan was predicated on a single, critical, and ultimately fatal assumption. They assumed their target would behave predictably. They had studied the security corporation's standard operating procedure, which dictated that in the event of a non-hostile, unexpected roadway obstruction, the driver should stop the vehicle at a safe distance, assess the situation, and if unable to proceed, reverse out of the area along the entry vector. This procedure is logical, safe, and designed to prevent accidents and unnecessary confrontations. It is also a perfect recipe for entrapment. The attackers banked their entire operation on the driver's professionalism, his adherence to the rules. They built a perfect cage, assuming the bird would fly into it according to its training. Their intellectual arrogance, their failure to account for an operator who could correctly identify the cage and choose to fly through the bars instead, was the single greatest vulnerability in their otherwise flawless plan. The fight goes to those who understand that the only way out of the kill zone is through it. At 6:47 and 3 seconds, the armored truck entered the on-ramp to the overpass, traveling at a steady 50 miles per hour. The driver and the communications guard noted the stopped sedan from a distance of approximately 300 meters. This was the first beat of the 18-second count. The initial reaction in the cabin was one of annoyance, not alarm. A stalled vehicle, a minor accident. These are common urban occurrences. This is the danger of normalcy bias, the cognitive shortcut that encourages the brain to interpret ambiguous information in the most familiar and least threatening way. The communications guard, according to his post-incident statement, reached for the radio to report a blocked lane, a standard by-the-book reaction. He was operating under the assumption of a civilian traffic incident. The driver, however, experienced a different cognitive process. His 17 years of experience had forged a deep, intuitive sense of pattern recognition. Something was wrong. The placement of the car was too perfect, too deliberate. There were no other people visible, no hazard lights, no signs of a typical breakdown. His brain began a rapid subconscious analysis. This is what we call the OODA loop in action. Observe, orient, decide, and act. He observed the anomaly. He began to orient himself to the new reality. This was not a traffic problem. It was an obstacle. And an obstacle in a canalizing choke point is a barricade. A barricade is an ambush. This entire orientation phase took less than 5 seconds. While his crewmate was still reacting to a stalled car, the driver was already mentally preparing for a violent engagement. He did not touch his brakes. He maintained speed. At 6:47 and 21 seconds, the ambush was initiated. The first shot was not a volley of suppressive fire. It was a single, precisely aimed round from the .50 caliber rifle. The designated marksman was positioned on a pedestrian walkway overlooking the overpass, granting him a clear, downward-angled shot at the truck's front windshield. The round struck the glass directly in the driver's line of sight. The effect was catastrophic, but non-penetrating. The 42mm laminate performed to specification. It delaminated into a spiderweb of opaque, milky white fractures across a 30-inch radius. The kinetic energy transfer was immense, creating a deafening boom inside the cabin that was felt as much as it was heard. A physical concussion that vibrated through the very frame of the vehicle. The spalling was severe. The inner layer of polycarbonate flaked away, sending a spray of sharp fragments into the cabin. The driver sustained multiple minor lacerations to his face and hands, and the force of the impact was enough to momentarily stun him. This was the psychological shock-and-awe phase of the attack, designed to disorient and paralyze the crew. This was the decide phase of the driver's OODA loop, compressed into the split second of the impact. The standard operating procedure was now a death sentence. To stop would be to cede all initiative, allowing the attackers to close the rear of the Bach and begin systematically dismantling the vehicle with the anti-materiel rifle. To reverse would be to attempt a slow, difficult maneuver while under heavy fire, a maneuver the attackers were certainly prepared to counter. The shattered, opaque windshield now rendered forward visibility almost zero. His training screamed at him, "Stop, assess." The manual he had memorized dictated it. But his experience, his 17 years of instinct, told him something else entirely. Static defense is death. He made his decision. At 6:47 and 24 seconds, 3 seconds after the initial impact, the rest of the assault team opened fire. The truck was engulfed in a storm of 7.62 millimeter rounds, originating from positions concealed behind the concrete barriers of the overpass. The sound inside the cabin became a continuous, deafening roar of metal-on-metal impacts, like 1,000 hammers striking the hull simultaneously. This was the suppressive fire phase, designed to pin the crew, prevent any effective return fire from the vehicle's gun ports, and further degrade their psychological state. The communications guard was now screaming into his radio, reporting contact, a volley of frantic, panicked transmissions. He was reacting to the attack. The driver was not reacting. He was acting. This is the final stage of the OODA loop, and it is the only one that matters. In the instant he made his decision, he had floored the accelerator. He was now aiming the 14-ton armored truck, not with his eyes, but with his memory of the road's geometry from seconds before the impact. He was driving blind, using the concrete retaining wall on his right side as a physical guide, scraping the vehicle along it to maintain a straight trajectory. His target was the sedan blocking the road, now only 100 meters ahead. The vehicle is your weapon. At 6:47 and 27 seconds, the attacker's rear-blocking element, the heavy SUV, began to move into position behind the truck, intending to close the trap. Simultaneously, assault team members began to advance from their covered positions along the walls. They were moving to their final assault positions, preparing to disable the truck's wheels and place breaching charges once it came to its expected halt. They were executing their plan with military precision, but their plan was already obsolete. It was based on a premise, the stopping of the truck, that was no longer true. They were moving to contain a static target, while the target was, in fact, accelerating toward them. The countermeasure was brutally simple. At 6:47 and 31 seconds, 18 seconds after the initial sighting of the blockade, the armored truck, now traveling at nearly 60 miles per hour, struck the sedan. The physics of the collision were elementary and absolute. A 14-ton mass impacting a 1.5-ton stationary object resulted in a complete transfer of kinetic energy. The sedan did not stop the truck. It disintegrated. The engine block was driven back into the passenger compartment, the chassis buckled and was thrown aside, clearing a path. The armored truck's reinforced bumper and sheer mass allowed it to plow through the wreckage with a shriek of tortured metal, losing some momentum but never threatening to stop. The driver experienced the impact as a second violent jolt, a jarring deceleration followed by a lurch as the truck's wheels regained traction on the asphalt beyond the wreckage. The psychological effect on the attackers was one of pure shock. Their entire plan had just been rendered void by a single, non-compliant action. The carefully constructed kill zone, the fatal funnel, had been breached. The target was not contained. It was through. An interesting tactical irony then unfolded. The wreckage of their own blockade vehicle now became an obstacle for them. Their pursuit vehicle, the SUV that was meant to seal the trap, was now forced to navigate the debris field, delaying its chase by critical seconds. This hesitation, born of disbelief, was all the driver needed. The truck, now clear of the primary kill zone, was still under fire from the attackers who were now firing at a receding target. Several more rounds struck the vehicle's rear and sides, but the engagement was effectively over. The driver, still navigating through his shattered windshield, kept the accelerator pinned. The run-flat tires, at least two of which had been punctured by the hail of gunfire, began to smoke but held their form. He was able to maintain a speed of over 40 miles per hour, rapidly increasing his distance from the ambush site. The attackers' pursuit in their SUV was brief and futile. They could not match the speed of the damaged but fleeing truck while also trying to fire accurately, and they broke off the chase after less than a mile, realizing the operation was a catastrophic failure. The total duration of the kinetic part of the engagement, from the first shot to the truck clearing the blockade was a mere 10 seconds. In that time, an estimated 250 rounds of small arms fire and at least 1.50 caliber round had impacted the vehicle. The result, 0 penetrations of the crew cabin or cargo hold. The technology had performed its function perfectly. It had bought time. It was the driver who had used that time to make the single decision that mattered. The aftermath was a study in contrasts. The driver continued for another 2 miles before pulling into a pre-designated safe zone, a fortified industrial complex where emergency response teams were waiting. The vehicle was functionally destroyed. Every body panel was scarred and dented. All 8 tires were shredded, though the run flats had held. The engine block, having absorbed several 7.62 millimeter rounds, was leaking fluids and had overheated to the point of seizure moments after coming to a stop. The ballistic glass on every window was a mosaic of cracks and delamination. The communications antennae were shot away. The vehicle was a write-off, an asset valued at over $250,000 reduced to scrap metal. The human cost was miraculously minimal. The cargo guard in the rear was uninjured, though severely shaken. The communications guard in the passenger seat suffered a concussion from the initial .50 caliber impact and minor cuts from spalling. The driver, the architect of their survival, had the most visible injuries, multiple lacerations on his face, arms, and hands from the windshield's fragmentation. None of the injuries were life-threatening. The cargo, the $5.2 million, was completely secure and untouched in its armored compartment. The corporation had lost a vehicle, but it had saved its crew and its client's asset. The outcome for the antagonists was vastly different. Their return on investment was 0. They had expended significant resources in planning, surveillance, and equipment for no gain. In their hasty retreat, they left behind crucial evidence, including shell casings that were later traced to a specific batch of foreign-manufactured ammunition. The abandoned stolen vehicles provided further forensic links. The intelligence gathered from this failed attack directly contributed to a series of law enforcement raids over the next several months that dismantled a significant portion of the cartel's logistical network in the region. Their meticulously planned operation had not only failed to achieve its objective, but had actively compromised their larger organization. Reports indicated that at least 2 members of the assault team were wounded by ricochets or debris from their own blockade vehicle during the chaotic breach. In the unforgiving calculus of their profession, the operation was an unmitigated disaster. Let us now synthesize these events into a cohesive tactical analysis. The incident represents a perfect case study in the dynamic relationship between technology, procedure, and human will. The vehicle's B6 armor and run-flat tires were essential. Without them, the crew would have been killed in the initial volley. The technology worked. It served its ultimate purpose, to provide the occupants with a survivable space in which to make life or death decisions. However, technology alone would not have guaranteed survival. Had the driver followed standard operating procedure, the very procedure the attackers had gambled on, the technology would have merely prolonged their deaths. It would have turned the truck into a steel tomb, allowing the attackers to disable it and take it apart at their leisure with the anti-materiel rifle. The failure of the antagonists was not tactical, but psychological. They had created a perfect military problem, a textbook ambush. Their fire control, positioning, and equipment were all of a high professional standard. Their mistake was in failing to account for an unconventional solution. They planned for compliance. They anticipated a response that adhered to the victim's own rulebook. They could not conceive of a driver who, when faced with a blocked path and overwhelming fire, would choose to accelerate into the heart of the kill zone. They failed to account for the supremacy of human willpower when guided by experience and a profound understanding of the tactical situation. They built a cage for a creature they thought they understood, only to find it was something else entirely. From this incident, we can distill 4 critical lessons that are applicable across the entire spectrum of security operations. The first is that intelligence security is the absolute foundation of all physical security. The attackers did not need an inside man. They simply needed to observe the target's patterns. The greatest vulnerability of this operation was its own procedural predictability. A security posture that is robust but predictable is ultimately fragile. True security lies in the intelligent application of variance and the constant evolution of tactics to prevent such predictive modeling by an adversary. Second, static defense is death. In any mobile security operation, momentum is life. The moment a protected asset becomes stationary in a hostile environment, it begins to die. The attacker's entire strategy was dependent on forcing the target vehicle to become a static object. The driver's decision to maintain and even increase his momentum was a direct counter to the fundamental principle of the ambush. He understood, on a level deeper than written procedure, that his vehicle's greatest defensive characteristic was not its armor, but its engine. Third, equipment buys time, but training determines outcomes. The B6 armor plating did not defeat the ambush. It merely provided the driver with the handful of seconds he needed to think. This is the true purpose of protective technology. It is not an infallible shield, but a buffer. It creates a window of opportunity. What happens in that window is purely a function of the human element. The driver's 17 years of experience, his countless hours of training, his innate psychological resilience, these were the weapons that ultimately won the engagement. The corporation's investment in advanced training for its elite drivers paid an infinitely greater dividend that day than its investment in thicker steel. Finally, the methodology of defense must evolve to match the sophistication of the threat. This was not an attack by low-level criminals. It was a military-style operation planned and executed with a high degree of proficiency. To counter such threats, security providers cannot rely on simplistic, rigid procedures. They must empower their operators, particularly those at the tip of the spear like the driver, to exercise tactical judgment. They must be trained to recognize the context of a situation, to understand when the rulebook becomes a liability, and to act with decisive autonomy. A rigid, hierarchical command structure that stifles individual initiative in a dynamic crisis is a recipe for disaster against an agile and intelligent foe. In the final analysis, the event turned on the fulcrum of a single human mind processing a crisis. The technology was a known quantity. The attacker's plan was a known quantity. The variable was the driver. He was faced with a choice. Trust the procedure designed in a safe corporate office, or trust his own senses and experience forged in the crucible of high-risk environments. He chose the latter. He had to build what we call a mental bridge, the psychological crossing point where years of abstract training become concrete, instantaneous action. Many are trained, but few can cross that bridge under the unimaginable pressure of imminent death. He did not have time for a committee decision or to ask for permission. He had only the inputs from his senses, the muscle memory in his hands and feet, and the cold, hard logic of survival. The shattered windshield, the screaming of his crewmate, the percussive roar of hundreds of rounds impacting his vehicle, all of it was secondary to the singular, unifying clarity of his decision. He chose aggression. He chose momentum. He chose to make the vehicle his weapon. That choice validated his entire career, vindicated his training, and stands as a stark testament to a timeless principle of conflict. Technology is a powerful ally, and planning is an essential tool. But in the final moment, the fight goes to those who understand that the only way out of the kill zone is through it. End of debrief.